We're now at the business end of this referendum campaign as the Prime Minister continues his push to rewrite the Australian Constitution. He says it's about simple recognition. Experts like constitutional law professor Nicholas Aroney, well, he disagrees. He says it will create a new head of power in our nation's founding document and fundamentally upend how we've been governed over the past 100 years. Now, if the polls are to be believed, the Voice is headed for defeat. But never underestimate your opponent. That's one of the first lessons my next guest taught me in politics, and that to win, you have to fight right down to the wire. He's doing that himself personally tonight, campaigning for the no side, and it comes to us now from Raymond Terrace in the Hunter Valley. Former Prime Minister, of course, Tony Abbott. Tony, welcome to the program. You were right to remind me not so long ago that for many months the polls said that the Republic would get up back in 1999, and history, of course, records that they read the mood wrong, meaning the No campaign and its supporters would be mad to think the Voice is defeated now, wouldn't they?
Look, the polls are encouraging, sure, but you can never take anything for granted. And given the moral pressure and the weight of money behind the Yes campaign, I'm certainly doing everything I possibly can to remind my fellow Australians that this Voice would be wrong in principle and very bad in practice. And the point I keep making is that constitutional change is for keeps. This matters. You can change a bad law, you can change a bad government, but gee whiz, if you make a mistake with the Constitution, you're stuck with it forever.
Well, you were one of the leading players back in 1999. Are you seeing any similarities with these two issues, these two campaigns even?
Well, there's no doubt that both the Republican issue back then and the Yes case now are being pushed by the elites. And look, fair enough, people are entitled to their view, even big business, I suppose, up to a point. But in the end, the Constitution has got to belong to everyone. And I want our Constitution to have all Australians as equals. I certainly don't want to see our Constitution changed so that we've got different classes of citizen, in effect, depending upon how long some of your ancestors have been in this country.
You've been attending no events across the country for a number of months now. I can reveal to my viewers tonight, you've also been spending a fair bit of time this week out on pre-poll booths. Give us some insights into how you're reading things, Tony.
A lot of people have obviously made up their mind, and I think a lot of people have made up their mind to say no. But again, there's still 9 days to go, and I only have to turn on my television or turn on my radio to see where the money is flowing, and that's why I don't think anyone can be complacent, even though I don't think the Yes campaign has gone well, and I don't think the Yes argument is really anything other than you've got to do it because that's the vibe.
There's been a real push in the Yes campaign in recent weeks to make their messaging really about recognition, not so much about the voice and power and detail. The PM keeps using that phrase advisory committee over and over again to somehow sort of downplay the importance of this body. Indeed, even this afternoon, the Prime Minister invoked your name, I suspect to try and win over some Conservative voters. Have a listen.
Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister who established a process saying what form should recognition take, which led to the work of Julian Leeser and Patrick Dodson. The idea that this has just come up since the change of government, they know is false.
Tony Abbott, what's your response?
Well, the process went very much off the rails after I left the Prime Ministership. What I had intended to be a process involving all Australians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and including a constitutional convention involving a broad range of people, became very much a hand-picked process of people who could be counted upon to support the Uluru Statement ideals of voice, treaty, truth. It was, I think the kindest thing you can say about the Uluru process is that it was guided. Certainly, I think there was a predetermined outcome that the activist class had in mind. They don't just want voice, they want treaty and truth, but just at the moment, that's not what they want to admit, because they know that the public are very, very averse to anything that involves reparations and retelling Australia's history as a story of shame.
Yeah, but your point way back then about recognition, very similar to John Howard's, was very different than this power body that Labor want to put in the Constitution. I mean, you just wanted a form of words, didn't you, that every Australian could see themselves in?
Correct. My plan back then was that at the right time, we would say, look, what we're going to do is change the preamble to the Constitution to state, after the words one indivisible federal commonwealth, to add these words, with an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation and an immigrant character, because we do have an Indigenous heritage, we did have a British foundation, we do have an immigrant character. I think this is a nice shorthand description of our country, and importantly, it's got something for everyone, because the Constitution has got to belong to everyone. As Bob Hawke famously said all those years back, this is a country with no hierarchy of descent, this is a country with no privilege of origin, and I reckon that's well preserved by the proposal that I was working towards back in 2015.
Look, last night I played some comments from Ray Martin, the veteran journalist. He made them in the presence of the Prime Minister at an event last week in Marrickville. Have a listen.
If you don't know, find out what you don't know. What that asinine slogan is saying is, if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who can't be bothered reading, then don't know. The No Vote organisers also keep asking Albo for the details. What about the details? At this stage of the game, the details simply don't matter.
Now, I'll put the personal attacks to one side, but Ray there says it's too late for the details. Somehow the details don't matter. And this point that if you don't know, you're supposed to read and find out. Well, the PM himself admitted, didn't he, that he hasn't even read the Uluru Statement in full. This has been the problem, Tony Abbott, with the Prime Minister's strategy from day one.
Completely correct. Look, he said his government was committed to the Uluru Statement in full, something like 34 times, and yet he still hasn't read it. It's bizarre. I mean, you wouldn't buy a car without knowing something about it. You wouldn't buy a house without knowing as much as you possibly could about it. And yet the Prime Minister is making a virtue of not telling us about what this thing is. We don't know who precisely would be eligible to be elected. We don't know precisely whether it's an election at all and who would be eligible to vote. We don't know how big the voice would be. We don't know the scope of its powers. We very much think that it will probably in the end be up to the unelected and essentially unaccountable High Court to determine these things. We're being asked to sign a blank cheque on our Constitution, and that's not something that sensible people would do.
Tony, I had some revelations at the top of the show from inside the Yes 23 campaign team. So this is the official Yes 23 campaign team trying to play a deceptive and sneaky game on the whole issue of treaty. Now, pull the wool over the person or the voters' eyes and ears that they're talking to on the phone, trying to win over their vote. What does that say to you?
Well, I think that any salesman who says one thing to one person and a different thing to another person is being fundamentally deceptive, being sneaky, not being straight, and yet all along this has been the problem with the Yes case. They've tried to pretend that it's no big deal to most voters while promising that it's going to be a very, very, very big deal indeed to the activist class. And this is why I think there are such deep suspicions about exactly what the Prime Minister has in mind.
All right, just before we go, a new podcast out from Abbott and Credlin. It's on the thorny issue of immigration. I mean, you're the last Prime Minister that tried to bring high rates of immigration and, of course, illegal immigration under some sort of control. This is a real issue, particularly in our cities right now, isn't it?
Look, there's absolutely no doubt that immigration at sky-high levels, at absolute record levels, is putting downward pressure on wages, upward pressure on housing costs, massive pressure on infrastructure, and unfortunately, the government seems more interested in attacking its political opponents than in actually trying to do something about one of the things that is contributing to the cost of living crisis.
Tony Abbott, thank you. Good luck with the campaign event tonight. There you go, Tony Abbott there.
Thanks, Peta.